So once we had our views in here, what I had done was I grabbed the end of the part here and I drug it all the way up to the first extrusion. When we go over here, the views follow the part. So if I say right click on this view and I say retrieve model annotations, now I'm going to try and select the part. I'm going to select the dimensions that I want. So right now all I have is the material. So I need these dimensions for the material. Does that make sense to y'all? I've got the height, I've got the width of this notch, I've got the height of this notch, and I've got the overall width of the part. So I'm going to say apply. So there are my dimensions. Now one thing that it doesn't do is it doesn't know where these things should end up. So you're going to have to drag the end dots of your dimensions, because remember we need an offset from origin, and sometimes you don't even get a line and you have to drag this thing up and down to get a line started and then drag it up. This just doesn't even want to do it. I'm going to bring that one right there, and then I'm going to grab this one and drag this one up here. Okay, so now we have our overall dimensions except for the depth of the part. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay, so now I'm going to select on this one, right click, retrieve dimensions, and I'm going to select the part dimensions that I need, 0.75, and apply on that one, and that's going to give me the depth of that whole thing. So now I'm going to go back to the part, and I'm going to resume this hole. So now I'm going to go back to the drawing, and it should appear in my drawing. So we know that with these holes, this is a counter bore that has a threaded hole. So I'm going to use retrieve dimensions, and I'm going to select those dimensions by the location here from the bottom up, and the dimension here from the side over, and that should give us our location for that hole. Now this one right here is just showing us the diameter of that hole. So what I'm going to do after I drag all these over, and I want you guys to do these piece by piece because it's easy to forget, but I want to come back and I'm going to get all my center lines and everything all at one time when I've retrieved all these, and then I'm going to move these out. So we're going to use a hole and thread note under annotate, hole and thread note, select the largest of the two combination of a hole. That is a metric M10 for a metric spark plug. It has a diameter of this and a depth of this. And I said we were going to leave all of our, on your directions, pardon me, it says that we're going to leave all of our dimensions to 2 places on this part for right now. Okay, the next thing that I'm going to go back to the part and I'm going to retrieve the next one. So now I'm going to go over here and I'm going to select this one, retrieve dimensions, and I'm going to select these dimensions. Now I have 2.44s. If I put a 2x on this or I put a center mark going down between these, I don't have to do that. So I'm only going to select this one in the X, and this one in the Y, and apply. Now that I have that, I could put a 2x on this by double clicking and put a 2x in front. The other thing that I could do, however, is I could go right here and put a center line that makes a continuation line between this and this, and right click and create if it just doesn't want to cooperate. So I do the same thing between this hole and this hole, just showing that they're in line. Okay, this template is old, and I want to show you something. When you select a center line and you right click, you can edit the center line style. And right here, and I'll give you these numbers again, B is half of D. So we use 32 thousandths on this one and 64 thousandths on this one. And if I save and close, that's going to update all my center marks to make center lines out of it. Okay, now we don't have a center mark in this one, but we're going to put it in a minute. So now I've got 0.44 from the center over to both of these holes, and 0.88 from these two holes to these two holes, and the same goes with this one. But remember that we cannot have any dimensions in the body of the part, and I like to put a little tail on this somehow. And notice how if you pull a dimension, is this correct? This is our dimension line. We cannot have a dimension anything running through a dimension line. So the trick to that is bring the dimension right over the extension line and it'll make a break. Tricky, tricky. Like this one. And that would be okay. All right, so we have those holes right there. We're going to go back to the part, resume the next hole, go back to the drawing, and where did that put this one in? So let me show you this one. If I put in a hole and thread note on this one, if you guys saw this in a drawing and you were going to machine this part, would you know that this is a flat bottom hole? You wouldn't know to use a flat end mill on this part. So what we have to do, not only is a flat end mill for a counter bore, but it's also for a flat bottom hole. So we put this flat bottom hole symbol and say OK. Now the hole and thread notes are the ones that are going to bring in the combination callouts. So I also need them for these too, right? So I've got to call these out. So something that we can do on this one is we've got to have a 4x on this. So let me show you the trick on that. If we go to the top here and we hit the quantity symbol, it's going to automatically put in how many holes that we have of that size. Okay, so we've got that one done. Do we have this one located? We got this located over here, and they're concentric. So is this located?
Yeah.
Yes. That's right. It's concentric, so we don't have to do that one. Let's go to the next source on our part. We're going to go down. There's a sketch, and the sketch has been turned off, but it's shared between multiple holes. And so if I go over here to this one, it pulled this hole in. So if I retrieve the dimensions on that one and say select parts, and I select the diameter, I don't want to use that for my hole and thread notes. But this hole is located from here and here, and I'm going to say OK. So now I can clean these up, keep working back and forth through this stuff, and bring this one down or something, and bring this down. All right, so now I need my hole and thread note for this one. And notice how it brings in the depth of that hole. You're not going to get that just by retrieving the diameter dimension. All right, so I'm going to go back to my part. I'm going to bring in the next holes. And what that did was it brought in these two holes on each side. They're measured from this one. So if I go back over here, and I could go ahead and bring in my hole and thread notes first. You're going to select on the visible line. And then what happened here? Did these go all the way through? They don't. So sometimes it forgets to get our depth. So notice that this right here is our hole depth value. This is the depth of our counterbore. This is a parameter, and it will bring it in for us. At the very first of this, I'm going to put in the quantity and say OK. So I have a 2x, and it didn't give me my symbol. So what you have to do is put the symbol in like this, and then put in the parameter for the hole depth and say OK. So I can move these views and give me a little bit more room and all that good stuff. Now I need to retrieve the dimensions for these holes. So retrieve dimensions. I'm going to select the parts. I want this dimension and this dimension. So essentially we're dimensioning one from the center of this one, which is already dimensioned, and then from this one to this one. And I'll move these around and kind of keep doing this for a while. And look at that. So if I have this situation, what you can do is right click on that and go to options and flip the arrowheads to the outside. Now I'm not crossing a dimension line. So we can do this in any time that you guys need to use that. Just make sure all your dimensions are off the part. Okay, then we're going to go back to the part and go to the next one. That's these two holes on this side. If I go back over here, now I see that these holes are all kind of in alignment. So let's go ahead and use our hole and thread note on the visible line of this hole. Once again, it doesn't tell us our depth. So I'm going to go to the second line. I'm going to put in a symbol and then the depth of the hole. And in the first of that, I'm going to put in the quantity note. So that worked out pretty well. Now I'm going to retrieve the dimensions to locate the holes. And I'm going to select this one and apply. And it looks like they're all in line. So I'm going to apply that. And you can tell that by going back to the part. So let's look at the part. And if you see this sketch, it's got all these holes in alignment. And if I look at this hole, it has those two sketches. And if I go to that sketch, these holes should be in alignment. So if I projected geometry, this part isn't a very good part, is it? I can make these vertically aligned with each other and with the center of this hole. And so now they turn that they're fully constrained. So now what I can do with this one is take a center line, go from here all the way down to here, and then to the next one, and it puts my center mark in as well. Right click and create when it continues to want to do something for you. All right, going back to my part, I'm going to come back down to the next hole, and that's on the bottom. So I'm going to this one. It's on the bottom over here. So I'm going to retrieve these dimensions. So I'm going to go to hole and thread note first. That one didn't give me my hole depth either, so I don't know what's going on with this software. It still hadn't updated. Hole depth. There's only one of them. And then I'm going to retrieve dimensions off this. And it gives me the XY dimensions as they were designed to be. Okay, and then I can move this because that kind of breaks it up. I'm going to go back to my part, and I just have one more feature, and those are the fillets. And then I can put on the fillets. Now we can retrieve that dimension or we can put it in. Right here I want you guys to notice that this is not really touching and doesn't have the correct offset. I know that I'm not going to see a gap there, so I wouldn't count off on that being that close. This one needs to come over to here as well. It was correct in the first place, but now I've brought those fillets in. So now I can just put in a dimension for my fillets if I want to. Do not let it touch the center point. If it touches the center point, it thinks you want an XY dimension. Point-to-point dimension. So in this one, I'm going to go to home and put a 4x in here, or I'm sorry, 3x, and say OK. And so now I have all the dimensions in my part. But right now, after I've done that, I'm going to select all these views. And when you hold down Control, it gathers the views. Right click and go to Automated Centerlines. In Automated Centerlines, we have the hole is already selected, cylinders, revolves, bullets or crosshairs, axial center lines, and circular patterns. So now it's put all my center lines in. Now notice if we don't have hidden lines in here, it's not going to put in our axial center lines because they're not shown. So that would be your part, and that's how you can make sure that you have all the dimensions for every feature by feature for dimension verification.